All right, let's dive into a question that might sound a little dry on the surface, but is absolutely fundamental to how a country of 1.4 billion people actually works. The question is, how does India split up its massive pile of tax money? You can think of it like the country has one giant wallet, and someone somewhere has to decide who gets what. So, who is that someone?
First, let's just try to wrap our heads around the numbers we're dealing with. This is the annual revenue of the government in India, a staggering 54 lakh crore rupees. That's a 54 with 12 zeros after it. Let's just call this the country's total family income. And the big mystery we're unpacking today is, how on earth do you manage a family budget of this size?
And that right there is the core challenge. You've got 28 states, and each one is completely different. Different needs, different populations, different challenges. How do you slice up this colossal sum of money in a way that's fair, that's equitable, and that actually helps the whole country move forward? It's honestly one of the biggest financial puzzles in the entire world.
Well, the answer lies with a constitutional body that, most of us have probably never even heard of. But this group holds an incredible amount of power over the nation's finances. It's an institution that works quietly, behind the scenes, making decisions that affect every single one of us. Okay, let's get into it. Meet the Finance Commission. Set up every 5 years under the Constitution, its #1 job is to recommend the rules for sharing that giant wallet. The best way to think about it is like a wise, totally impartial accountant for the whole country. Or maybe like the respected family elder who steps in to decide how the annual income gets shared between the parents, that's the central government, and all the children, the states.
So the very first, and you could say the biggest decision the Commission makes, is what's known as the vertical split. Basically, how much of that total tax pie goes to the central union government and how much is put into one big pool for all 28 states combined. This is the first and most fundamental cut.
Now, the official technical term for this whole process is vertical devolution. It's just a fancy way of saying the top-down sharing of money from the center to the states as one collective group. This single recommendation really sets the tone for pretty much all government financing that follows.
And here's where it gets interesting, because this might actually surprise you. After the Finance Commission's formula does its magic, it's the states collectively that end up with the bigger slice of the pie. In 2023, the states together controlled about 57% of that tax revenue, while the union government kept 43%. But what's really fascinating is how this balance has shifted over the years.
And this chart tells that story perfectly. Just look at the bar on the far left from the late 70s. States got less than a quarter of the tax revenue. Now, fast forward to 2014, that middle bar, it's up to about 32%. But then, whoa, look at that massive jump to over 40% in just 1 year. That was a game-changing recommendation by the 14th Finance Commission. The trend is unmistakable. More and more financial power has been shifting to the states.
So why is this so debated? Well, because it's a constant tug of war. On one hand, the states argue, quite reasonably, that they need more money for the stuff that directly impacts you and me: local schools, public health, clean water. But on the other hand, the union government has to fund things that protect the entire country. We're talking defense, national highways, and foreign policy. The Finance Commission is stuck right in the middle, trying to balance these two very valid but competing demands. So the states now have their collective 57%. But that tug of war we just talked about, it doesn't end there. In fact, it's about to get a whole lot more complicated. Because now the question becomes, how do you divide that massive pool of money among 28 very, very different states?
Well, it's definitely not as simple as an equal split per state or even per person. That just wouldn't be fair. Instead, the Commission uses this incredibly detailed and carefully weighted formula, and this formula is designed to balance two big ideas: equity, which means helping out the states that need more support, and efficiency, which means rewarding states that are doing a good job.
Okay, so here's the secret sauce, the actual formula from the 15th Finance Commission. You can see it's a mix of all these different criteria, and each one has a specific weight. Some of it is pretty straightforward, right? Population, an area, more people to serve, a bigger territory to manage. It makes sense that you need more money. But then it gets really interesting with criteria that are designed to reward good governance, like protecting your forests or managing population growth. It's this fascinating blend of helping those in need and encouraging good performance.
Now, the single biggest piece of this puzzle, carrying a massive 45% weight, is something called income distance. This is that equity principle in action.
It's basically a complex way of making sure that states with lower incomes get a bigger share of the pie. The whole idea is to help them bridge that economic gap and catch up with the wealthier states. But it's not all about need. Performance absolutely matters. The formula specifically rewards things like demographic performance and forest and ecology, and this is pretty clever because it creates a direct financial incentive for states to get on board with national goals, like sustainable development or population management. Good performance literally pays.
Okay, so splitting up that main tax pool is the Commission's biggest job, for sure, but their work isn't done. They also recommend other kinds of financial support to tackle very specific issues that the main formula might not cover.
These are known as grants and aid, and they are super important for plugging specific gaps. For example, even after getting their share, some states might still be struggling financially. That's what revenue deficit grants are for. Then you have grants that go directly to your local city or village to fund services you see every day. And there are also special funds set aside for things like disaster relief or to encourage big reforms in key areas like the power sector.
You know, this quote from the very first Finance Commission, way back in the 1950s, just nails the whole philosophy. The Commission doesn't just hand out money to fill whatever budget gap a state says it has. It uses what's called a normative approach. It actually assesses what a state should be able to raise in taxes on its own and how efficiently it should be spending its money. It's not a blank check, it's a really careful assessment of what's truly needed. So, what does this all mean for the future? Well, the work of the Finance Commission isn't just about dividing up money today. It's really about charting a course for India's long-term economic stability and its future growth.
And the challenges ahead are pretty significant. The Commission also gives guidance on major economic reforms that the country needs for good fiscal health. We're talking about things like managing government debt, fixing the troubled power sector, making sure subsidies actually reach the people who need them, and getting state-owned companies to perform better. So its role is just as much about steering the ship as it is about dividing the cargo.
So the next time you hear about a new highway being built in your state or a new national policy getting rolled out, maybe you'll remember the quiet architect working behind the scenes, the Finance Commission. It's a constant, incredibly complex balancing act. And as India's ambitions continue to grow, so does the challenge of keeping this delicate fiscal balance. The big question is, can it keep pace? Thanks for tuning in.